Okay, this is Jared Williamson. I'm going to go over um, some popular evangelical eschatology, focusing on Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy and the secret rapture. And be forewarned, I'm intending to show why this popular eschatology is actually erroneous or incorrect, meaning not biblical. It's not what the Bible is intending to communicate. Okay, so be forewarned, I'm trying to show that it's not true. Okay, in other words, not true meaning not what the Bible teaches. Okay, so you'll see a lot of discussion in the evangelical community talking about the secret rapture, the rebuilding of the temple, a focus on national Israel, talk about people being left behind, most commonly seen in the Left Behind series of books and novels, series of novels and the movies. And whenever you go on YouTube or Christian television stations, they're always focusing on events in Israel, especially if it's something to do with Prophecy Watch or something like that. I happen to be pro Israel. I happen to be pro Israel because they are a democracy in the Middle East. Okay, but I am pro Israel for that reason, not pro Israel because I believe necessarily that that is the central focus of all Bible prophecy. Okay, but anyway, you'll see a lot of this in popular um, evangelical prophecy discussions. Okay, what is the popular end times scenario among especially American evangelicals? Okay, so here we have a picture that I got from the internet. There's a reference down at the bottom. And the approximate sequence of events, there's a lot of discussion, a lot of disagreement and debate, but the approximate sequence of events, according to them, they believe, sincerely so, that the Bible teaches at some point, at any point, it's imminent, Christ will secretly and invisibly snatch the church up to heaven. That is called the secret rapture. They'll commonly just call it the rapture. But the implication or the unspoken part is that is a secret rapture. It is secret and invisible. Jesus does not appear visibly in the clouds. It's secret and invisible. All the true believers just suddenly disappear. This begins a 7-year tribulation or period of hard times, commonly just called the tribulation among evangelicals. It's a tribulation on earth in which most of the events in Revelation unfold. Not all the events in Revelation, but most of the events in Revelation unfold. At the beginning of that 7-year period, an Antichrist or the Antichrist makes a 7-year peace treaty or 7-year covenant with national Israel and lives in a literal rebuilt Jewish temple. Okay. Halfway through, or 3.5 years through that 7-year covenant, the Antichrist breaks the peace treaty with Israel. Okay, so 7 years, halfway through, the peace treaty is broken. That's relevant. Okay. And then at the end of that remaining 3.5 years for the 7 years, Christ returns with the church visibly to begin the millennium. So we have here the rapture. Christ returns for his church invisibly. Antichrist in the temple literal temple here on earth, makes a 7-year covenant, so they say. 3.5 years into it, he breaks the covenant. And then 3.5 years later is the end of the 7 years. Christ returns with his church. Okay. That whole 7 years is called the tribulation. And then this is the beginning of the millennial reign of Christ. That's the general outline, lots of discussion about the details. I'm not here for the details. What is the backbone behind this? Where do they get this from? They get this largely from Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy in Daniel chapter 9 of the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. I'm not going to read all of this to you. You can find it for yourself. But some key parts in this that I will go over, because this is a Bible study on Daniel chapter 9, kind of an overview Bible study, okay, not a detailed exegesis. But some of the key parts are phrases like 70 weeks are determined for your people in your holy city. Other key parts of it are until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Obviously, I'm not reading all of this. I'm talking about some key parts. After the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. And then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. Does that sound familiar? But in the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offerings. That sound familiar, right? Antichrist. 7 years, 1 week, middle of the week, bring an end of sacrifice and offering. Does that sound kind of familiar? Okay. Again, I'm going to show you some more. I'm not going to read. I'm providing everything for context, but I'm not going to read it all to you. Okay. Timeline. Before 605 BC, leading up to 605 BC, God had decided to punish Israel by having them led captive into Babylon for breaking the covenant he had made with them at Mount Sinai. And they were led captive into Babylon for breaking the covenant. Around 605 BC, Daniel arrived in Babylon as a captive. He'd been captive in Babylon thereafter. Around 538 BC, Daniel makes note of Jeremiah's 70 years prophecy, not Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy, but Jeremiah's 70 years prophecy, in which earlier the prophet Jeremiah said that Israel would be captive in Babylon for 70 years, and then God would deliver them from Babylon. Daniel was reading Jeremiah's scroll, saw that the 70 years were about up, and started praying for Israel's release. And about 538 BC, the angel Gabriel appeared to Daniel and gave Daniel what is called the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel, not the 70 years prophecy of Jeremiah, 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel. And some operative parts of the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel are in the beginning of the 70 weeks prophecy is the beginning. This beginning of the 70 weeks prophecy would be when the decree to rebuild and restore Jerusalem. That's when the beginning of the prophecy would start. That occurred in 457 BC. And another indicator time point within that 70 weeks prophecy would be when Jesus was baptized, and that happened to be in AD 27. We'll talk about that in a moment, but that's the basic timeline of what's going on here. Again, not reading this to you, but in Daniel chapter 9, the first half over here on the left half consists of an introduction and then Daniel's prayer in which he's praying to God. And it's basically saying, God, we have sinned against you. Please forgive our sins and keep your covenant to us, not because of we are righteous, but because you're merciful to us. The right-hand side is an introduction to the 70 weeks prophecy, in which the angel Gabriel is speaking to Daniel. And then verses 24 through 27 is the prophecy itself. Okay. The context of the 70 weeks prophecy, the left-hand side. In the beginning of it, Daniel the prophet understood that the 70 years captivity prophesied by Jeremiah were almost up. You could see it there in the red. In the first year of his reign, Daniel, understood that he would accomplish 70 years, that the number of years specified by the word of the Lord through the Jeremiah prophet, through Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish the 70 years and the desolations of Jerusalem. I'm stumbling over my words, but I knew that the time was almost up. Then in the next parts, Daniel's prayer is a confession of his people's sinfulness and a petition to God to keep the covenant he made with them at Sinai, regardless of the people's sin. And I highlighted operative parts in red. Daniel's praying and says, "Oh, great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant?" It says here, "We have sinned and committed iniquity. We have done wickedly and rebelled. We have ignored your precepts and judgments. We have not listened to your prophets." Over here it says, "We have sinned, broken your laws, ignored your prophets, transgressed your laws, disobeyed your covenant." And the judgment for that is being carried away into captivity, and as a nation being wrecked as a nation. As it is written in the law of Moses, all this disaster has come upon us, yet we have not made our prayer before the Lord, that we might turn from our iniquities and understand your truth. Okay. So the context here is, we have sinned against you. We have violated your laws. We have not obeyed the covenant. We have ignored your prophets. Okay. Daniel begs God to forgive his people because God is merciful, not because Israel is righteous. Down here, "Oh my God, incline your ear and hear, open your eyes and see our desolations in the city, which is called by your name. For we do not present our supplications before you because of our righteous deeds, but because of your great mercies. So show mercy to us as a nation and to our city, Jerusalem, which is synonymous with their nation, not because of our righteousness, but because of our mercy, because of your mercy." Daniel's entire focus is upon God's mercy and the covenant. Okay. Here, the 70 weeks prophecy. Wait, why am I missing a part? Okay. All right. Anyway, that's the operative part there. Daniel's entire focus is upon the covenant. In the 70 weeks prophecy, Daniel shows up and the angel Gabriel appears, or Daniel is praying and the angel Gabriel appears to Daniel and gives him a timeline for when Messiah would appear. And again, not reading the entire thing, just taking some operative parts, and then I'll go over other operative parts. It says here, 70 weeks are determined for your people and your holy city, right? You're praying about your people and your capital city. 70 weeks are determined to seal up vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. Israel had 70 weeks, which is actually turns out to be 490 years, until Messiah the Prince appears, which is Jesus, and confirmed his new covenant with Israel. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, right, the anointed Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. That's 69 weeks or 483 years after the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Jesus would be baptized by John. That's after the 62 weeks, Messiah would be cut off, but not for himself. The only anointed one who is cut off, but for someone else, is Jesus. And then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. This, after the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince who is to come. Who's the prince that's to come? Messiah is the prince who's to come. Who's the people of that prince? The Jews. The people of the prince to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. That's the upcoming destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. The Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of that week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. How did Jesus do that? It is Jesus who confirmed a covenant with many. He's called the messenger of the covenant. It was Jesus who, in the middle of the 70th week of Daniel's 70 weeks, who brought an end to sacrifice and offering. The entire 70 weeks prophecy is about Messiah Jesus and the new covenant. It's not about some future Antichrist in some future temple. The New Testament, Jesus in the New Testament interprets the entire thing as about being about Jesus. The start of the 70 weeks prophecy, 70 weeks determined for your people in your holy city. Ezra 7 records the decree of Artaxerxes to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. There were several decrees, but the decree of Artaxerxes to restore and rebuild Jerusalem was in 457 BC. It's recorded in Ezra 7, counting 69 weeks, right? Which is 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Counting 69 weeks from 457 BC, we land in AD 27. In AD 27 is when the Most Holy was anointed. Well, how do I know that's referring to Jesus? The New Testament interprets that as being about Jesus, not me. 70 weeks determined for your people in your holy city to finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. And now Jesus answered and said unto him, John the Baptizer, suffer it to be so now, for thus it becometh us to fulfill all righteousness. The next day John seeth Jesus coming unto him and saith, Behold the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world. Upon whom thou shalt see the Spirit descending and remaining on him, the same as he which baptizes with the Holy Ghost. And I saw and bear record that this is the Son of God. Daniel 9:24 is about Jesus. It is Jesus who is anointed to make an end of sin and bring in everlasting righteousness. Daniel 9:26, and after the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. Right? 3.5 years after his baptism, he was cut off. He was crucified. Not for him. He was cut off, but not for himself, but for others. Isaiah 53:8. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was stricken. For this, Jesus giving the interpretation, for this is my blood of the New Testament. This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for the remission of sins. Jesus talking about, he's confirming the covenant and saying that he's being cut off for others. Jesus' interpretation, Matthew 26:28. And after 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince who is to come. Who is the prince that Daniel 9 is talking about? The anointed prince, Messiah, Jesus. It's the only one who's talking about. So who are the people of the prince? The Jews. They shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. How did they destroy it? The Romans destroyed it. How did they destroy it? They rejected Jesus. And then they rebelled against the Romans. And Jesus said, not one stone will be left upon the other. Said, like a mother hen, I called you, but you would not. Jesus told his disciples, not one stone will be left upon another. And he didn't blame it on the Romans. Who did he blame it on? And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end of it shall be with a flood, till the end of the war of desolations are determined. Jesus specifically referred to Daniel 9:26 when he talked about the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And he was also conflating that and mixing it in with the end of the world in Matthew 24. And when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Notice he was eliminating Antiochus Epiphanes as being a fulfillment of Daniel chapter 7 or Daniel chapter 8, because he said the abomination of desolation is future of the date of Matthew 24. So he's eliminating it. He's not saying just like Antiochus Epiphanes was. So no, he's saying it's future of his day. It's eliminating the Antiochus Epiphanes interpretation. So those of you that say Antiochus Epiphanes was the little horn, and Jesus says, nah, it's future of his time. Future of Jesus' time when he's speaking in Matthew 24. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, future of Matthew 24, stand in the holy place. Then let them which is be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which on the housetop not come down to take anything out of the house. Let him which is in the field return, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. Jesus was talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in Matthew 24, and he's referring to Daniel 9:26. And he blamed that not on the Romans. Daniel 9:27 is about Jesus. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. Malachi 1:3:1 even says that Jesus is the messenger of the covenant. Behold, I send my messenger, you prepare the way before me, and the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant. I hear that in Handel's Messiah. I'm not going to dare sing it, right? But if you're familiar with Handel's Messiah, you hear even the messenger of the covenant in that voice. Isaiah 53:11, my righteous servant shall justify many. Matthew 20:28, he gave his life as a ransom for many. Mark 10:45, to give his life a ransom for many. Romans 5:15, grace had aboundeth unto many. Romans 5:19, shall make many righteous, imputed righteous. They're not intrinsically righteous. Romans 15:8, confirm the promises made unto the fathers, right? Confirm the covenant made unto the fathers. Daniel 9:27 is about Jesus. He is the only covenant confirming prince, not some antichrist. To interpret 9:27 about some antichrist is, in my opinion, heresy. It's blasphemy, in my opinion. Here, going back, Daniel 9:27, then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. Let's go to the next page. Christ's sacrifice in the middle of the week brought an end to the sacrifices and offerings. There's not going to be a rebuilt Jewish temple. The Antichrist is not going to rebuild a literal Jewish temple. The Bible does not predict an Antichrist in a literal rebuilt Jewish temple. And there's no need for one, right? Jesus, when he cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from top to the bottom. There's temple's not needed anymore. Why is the temple not needed anymore, right? For the law, having a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of the things, can never with those sacrifices which they offered by year by year, continually make the comers thereunto perfect. Then he said, Lo, I come to do thy will, O God. He taketh away the first, that he may establish the second. Right? Get away with that. Right? What's the main point of all this? Right? Now of the things which we have spoken, this is the sum. We have such an high priest who is set on the right hand of the throne and majesty of heaven, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle which the Lord pitched and not man. For if the first covenant had been faultless, then no place had been sought for the second. Jesus' death and resurrection in the middle of the week brought an end to the sacrifices and the offerings. Not some antichrist in a rebuilt Jewish temple making a peace treaty with national Israel for 7 years and then breaking it off 3.5 years later. The New Testament interprets that, Daniel 9:24 through 27, as about Jesus. It's about Jesus, not some antichrist. Now, this is the things which we have spoken. This is the sum. We have such an high priest who is set on the right hand of the throne of the majesty of heaven, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle which the Lord pitched and not man. That's beautiful. What concluded the 70th week? The stoning of Stephen. That's Acts chapter 6, 8 through 7:59. A big chunk of the book of Acts. And that stoning is not some insignificant act. It takes a big chunk of the book of Acts because it was a covenant lawsuit. Whenever God was about to punish his people, he brought a covenant lawsuit against his people. He brought prophets to his people and told them, you're violating the covenant. And this is what you did wrong. And this is what you did wrong. And this is what you did wrong. And I'm going to punish you. And the prophets told them the terms of the covenant and how they violated the covenant. And Daniel started out by saying, please forgive us because we broke your laws and we did not listen to your prophets who said we were breaking the covenant, and you then punished us by carrying us off into Babylon. Daniel, his speech, not Daniel, but Stephen, his speech in Acts 6:8 through 7:59 is a covenant lawsuit, just like the other prophets did. And what qualifies Stephen as a prophet is before he was stoned to death, he looked up into heaven and he saw Jesus standing at the right hand of the Father. He's now a prophet. And the Sanhedrin still stoned him. In 538 BC, Daniel prays for God's forgiveness for Israel violating of the covenant and is given the 70 weeks prophecy. At the end of the 70th week, Stephen brings a covenant lawsuit against the Sanhedrin. Not some average guys, against the Sanhedrin, the representatives of the people, the highest court in the land. Like Daniel, Stephen claimed they violated the covenant by worshiping the golden calf, worshiping false gods, killing the prophets, not otherwise keeping the covenant. And then he finished off with, you killed God's own son. Which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? They killed those who had previously announced the coming of the righteous one, and you have now become betrayers and murderers of him. The Sanhedrin understood that this is a covenant lawsuit. They knew this was not just some guy off the street making some claim. They knew what they were being accused of. And they were enraged. And when Stephen was looking up into heaven and saw Jesus sitting at the right hand of God, or standing at the right hand of God, they went and stoned him to death and murdered him anyway. Right? They sealed it. That ended They're 490 years. That ended the 70th week. By the way, Jesus talked about that same thing in the parable of the wicked vine dressers. I'm not going to read this to you, but he basically says in verses 33 through 39, he says, I sent servants one after the other, and then which represent the prophets, and then I will send my own sons. Surely they will respect my son. They take and then killed my own son, right? Therefore, the owner of the vineyard comes. What will he do to those vine dressers? They said to him, he will destroy those wicked men miserably. And lease his vineyard to other vine dressers who will render him the fruits in their seasons. Then Jesus said to them, have ye never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore, I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken from you and given to a nation bearing the fruits of it. And whoever falls on this stone will be broken, but on whomever it falls, it will grind him to powder. Now, when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived he was speaking of them. But when they sought to lay hands on him, they feared the multitudes because they took him to be a prophet. Jesus said this was going to happen, and it happened with Stephen. At the end of the 70 weeks prophecy, Daniel bookended the front, Stephen bookended the back end of it. Jesus said this was going to happen. The 70 weeks prophecy is about Jesus. The decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem was in 457 BC. 69 weeks or 438 years later, 69 weeks, Jesus was baptized, anointed of the Most Holy. You have the last week confirming the covenant with Israel. Jesus says, I go first to Israel. 3.5 years into that, he was cut off for his people and for many, for everybody. Still, they went to Israel. It wasn't until the Sanhedrin confirmed the rejection of 490 years. That's when the gospel went to the Gentiles. The Gentiles couldn't, it's not replacement theology. The Gentiles now could join Israel, right? Two became one. Okay. It's not Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy. It's not about some church gap and Antichrist. Here's a counterfeit end time scenario contrasted with what the Bible teaches. Jesus said he would never come secretly. Matthew 24 says, if anybody says I came in secret, here I'm there, lo, I'm there, don't believe them. They say Jesus comes secret in a secret rapture. Jesus is the covenant making prince. The Old Testament, the New Testament says that's the case. The counterfeit says Christ is the covenant maker. The Antichrist is the covenant making prince. That's what the counterfeit says. Here's the counterfeit, right? AD 70, they have this big church gap, and then they put the 70th week, completely unrelated to Jesus. And that 70th week is all about the Antichrist, right? Jesus is cut off 3.5 years into his covenant confirming ministry with Israel. The error says the Antichrist makes a covenant with Israel for 7 years and then breaks the covenant 3.5 years later. The New Testament says the church is the temple on earth, and Christ is our high priest in the heavenly temple. The counterfeit says they twist 2 Thessalonians 2:2 to mean that the Antichrist rebuilds a literal temple on earth rather than the Antichrist arises from within the church. The truth says that Gentiles are adopted into Israel to form the church, the one true Israel of God. That's the whole book of Ephesians, right? That's the whole book of Ephesians. The error says there's a radical separation between Israel and the church. God has his earthly people and his spiritual people, and the separation between the two. The whole book of Ephesians just refutes that. Another error of Satan's counterfeit end time scenario is a second chance at salvation if you miss the secret rapture. We go back to what the truth is. This is the truth. Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy is about Jesus and the new covenant, not the New Testament and the Old Testament. Interpret it to be that, not something else. Okay. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say. Comments are appreciated, subscriptions, whatever you want to do. I really appreciate comments. And, I'm new at this. I'm not very good at it. I appreciate it if you would comment, subscribe, maybe spread the word. Thank you.